Hello, everyone.
Hello. Hello from Los Angeles.
Hello from San Francisco. And thank you for joining us, Frank. You've done so many things, and I can't even begin to share the details of it properly. So I would really love for you to kind of give us some of your background, if you don't mind.
Well, I'd love to. Thank you, Tina, and thank you for having me on the show. I'm an entrepreneur. I most recently, in my full time career, put together a company with my wife, Linda, put together a company that was involved with consultation to the pharmaceutical field. We did work on clinical trials to help pharmas get drugs to market more rapidly. We used advertising and other types of media and public activities to bring people to know more about the studies that are available out there. Having having exited that just a few years ago, I've been involved in social service projects of varying sorts, doing some music, and generally trying to make myself valuable in the world.
Well, I think your latest endeavor was actually extremely valuable. And so, yeah, you'd have to tell us all about the good that you have done during, you know, this time and what you've done for the community. Can you please tell me a little bit more about the Ribbons for Research project?
Well, I think you're specifically referring to the public service campaign we put together for COVID.
Yes.
So I'll give you a little background on that. We have just observed that when we first put this together, that the messages emanating from a lot of healthcare professionals were pretty clinical and to a degree kind of talked down to the audience. And a lot of people didn't understand them. Of course, some people did, and they worked to get a lot of people vaccinated. But at the same time, there were a lot of folks who simply didn't understand much about vaccination. Some of them were people who uh, language wasn't English, wasn't their first language, and then there were some folks who just needed more time and education and perhaps a more personal appeal to connect up to at least considering the idea of getting a vaccination. So what we did with that in mind was we found people who had been personally touched by their experience with vaccination. We actually went ahead and filmed people who had the experience of COVID very close to their family. One, our star our star testimonial, her mother actually had COVID. Her husband had COVID. She did, and her father, who actually died from the condition.
Oh,
So
that's horrible.
it was very sad and very traumatic. She thought she was going to lose her mother on Mother's Day. Um, but the kind of the kernel of what we did was to try to communicate with people, as I was saying, one to one, and share the emotional value of um, why the you might want to get or consider vaccination. One of the things that we undertook, by the way, in our approach was not a hard sell kind of an approach, but rather the notion that people should consider vaccination. We aren't sure that everyone should get it because there are some people who are medically compromised, etc., who don't need or shouldn't get a vaccination. But for a large percentage of people who weren't vaccinated and still aren't, it's because there's some misunderstanding or perhaps they don't understand the science, but what they could understand, we felt, was a one to one connection with people who had experienced COVID and who, in some cases, had deferred getting a vaccination, in some cases, had ended up in the emergency department and of hospitals. And so we wanted to kind of open the discussion to a wider range of approaches than had been done before.
Well, so is it Ribbons for Research, or is there a name for the project?
Well, Ribbons for Research is the 501(c)(3), the charitable organization that sponsored it, and it's frankly it's a labor of love for myself and my wife. As I say, it's we've self-funded the initiative. We had some wonderful partners who helped us with some some of the heavy lifting when it came to getting the message out there and producing the public service announcements, etc. But the Ribbons for Research is the name of the people we spoke with, including some that were on the news, that we simply put their message out there. And of course, a lot of them had expressed regret that they hadn't undertaken their vaccinations at an earlier point. Some of them were in very dire straits. Some of them were families where they actually lost members of their family. Because as we know, the number of deaths in the U.S. is approaching 1 million. And so there's clearly the need for vaccination. And as I say, while we don't want to be heavy-handed about it, we do want to offer the facts from the standpoint of making them more available, perhaps, than having doctors and government officials deliver that message alone.
I mean, I think it's important. I think education and awareness is always a big piece. The messages have been a little bit confusing sometimes too, and I think
And they still are, unfortunately, because it's it's dynamic. Just in the last month or so, there have been, of course, there was Omicron, and that increased the number of infections, and then the whole question of masks and masks in schools, that's gone through some evolution, just as I say, in recent weeks. So it's a complicated issue, and what we're really urging is vigilance, people using masks in a protective way when they can. And the thing that, just as an aside, the thing that strikes me, I mentioned the number of fatalities that occurred, which is, of course, tragic. We look at the statistics from the hospitals, and all of those people were not vaccinated. So we're trying to get that message forward, and as I say, without making it a political debate, because that's a pretty good way to not be heard, is if you tell the other guy that he's wrong, he probably won't listen to you.
right. I mean, I think, yeah, it's been a crazy time. I mean, I don't think we ever thought that we would be living through a pandemic, and keeping things simple and like helpful would have been, I think, is a little bit more would have been a bit more constructive
I think
overall.
2020 hindsight, you're right. I think the government didn't really have a playbook on how to do this. In fact, if there were a playbook, I think it was somewhat disconnected during the prior presidential administration. And so, yes, there hadn't been a pandemic of this scale for 100 years. And smaller ones had occurred, but I think people thought that they would come and go pretty quickly. SARS and some of the other conditions, they were pretty quickly extinguished. So it really took people, including, as I say, government officials, medical health, public health experts. They really had to change their message as they went along. And I think that gave people a lot of discomfort because they wanted to hear, what are you supposed to do? Mask, no mask? When's the vaccine coming out? Of course, there wasn't a vaccine until a year ago. And then, of course, the priority of who could be vaccinated, that was a kind of a question for some amount of time. And even now, there's a question of should the booster shot, should kids be vaccinated, etc. So I think our general message is that the attempt at solving a public health crisis shouldn't be politicized. And as I say, our road to trying to do that is simply sharing the experience of people who have encountered this firsthand and would like to share the benefit of their message to help others.
I think it's important. I also have had quite a few friends and family get COVID, get vaccine, but there's a whole plethora of things, and safety is always the best way to go. And I'm a big fan of what you're doing. Thank you for doing this public service. But it's technically a public service announcement as a whole, right? And so
It is.
the whole project.
That's how we characterize it. It's a public service announcement. We've had over 6,000 airings on television across the U.S. over the last 3 months or so, and maybe 4 now. And they've been in all the major markets. We've also had them on television, and as I say, we also did a Spanish campaign for people who English wasn't their first language. So we're proud of the fact that so many TV stations saw value in this and put the message out there so proactively.
You for doing it. Can you tell us, Frank, where people can see some of this messaging and programming?
Sure can. You can go to ribbonsforresearch.org and see samples of the public service announcements. You can also see a music video that we created, because one of the things that we found is that for the millennial population and people younger than that, they're not big TV users. So we put together a music video called COVID-19 is Hell. And COVID-19 is Hell is on YouTube, and as I say, also available on some social media channels. And actually, we would ask if any of your viewers and listeners would like to promote that, or the public service announcements. They could go to that website and contact us. We'll get them the information, or they can download it from there and advance the cause with whatever group they're most closely affiliated with.
And share it. We'll share it too. So thank you.
Thank you, Tina.
I mean, thank you so much. There's actually been so many people affected with this. I mean, obviously, we're in a pandemic. It's even strange to watch TV shows, right? Like you're watching Law and Order and you actually see everybody also wearing the mask. And they're
Mm-hmm.
also kind of alluding to some of the, well, you should wear a mask or not. And it is kind of unfortunate that it's gotten so polarized to
Mm-hmm.
the community care aspect of just wearing a mask if you might be around others, just to be err on the side of caution in case somebody may have varying conditions that nobody knows about is important. And so thank you for doing this.
Well, that's a good point too, because some people may be carriers, not know it, and of course, the masks that are being recommended today are a bit more structurally integral than the original, the little cloth masks that people wore, and so those N95 masks seem to be something that people should explore. Now, one other thing you had asked about earlier, one other thing that we've been involved in has been the development, and this was about a year and a half ago, of a documentary film, again with real people, called Stay Alive, that was aimed at suicide prevention. And people can find that at stayalivevideo.com. The premise of the film was for an hour and a half to explore the issue of suicidality and what causes it and what you can do if you know a person who's in distress. And surprisingly, one of the things I learned is that our instincts are often not too good at that. So we tend to trivialize the problem and rather than being really thoughtful if a person's in a tough way. The way that we structured the Stay Alive film, as I say, there are three people in it that provide a nice kind of a roundtable discussion. We have Mark Goulston, who's a psychiatrist at UCLA, and that's his specialty, is preventing suicide. And in 30 years, he never lost a patient. And so his message on how to deal with issues and how to deal with, as I say, someone in distress, or if you yourself are in distress, he's got some great checklists in there. And then we've got Reiko, who's a musician, who talks about how suicide and depression have affected the musical community, and she actually did a music video that appears adjacent to the documentary. And then Kevin Hines, who's known as the man who jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge and lived, he's also in the documentary, and he has some great messages about his own personal experience and how challenging it was, and over the last several years how he's made a wonderful recovery, but it's still he still has challenges, which I think makes his presentation very authentic, because it's not, he hasn't snapped out of it, so to speak. He still has challenges, both physical and emotional, that he carries with him. But he tells his story of going to the Golden Gate Bridge and actually kind of seeking out someone to tell him to take a step back, and he didn't find that person. And so he's attempting to provide some of that message for those who view that film. Film's won a couple awards, and again, we are enthusiastic for people to share it with others. It has that same kind of one-on-one approach, Tina, that helps folks to take it in. It's not a lecture. It's informal conversations as if it were taking place at a coffee house. So again, stayalivevideo.com is where you can find that message, and also I think it's going to be posted soon on Amazon. So another place to find it. But we hope that people will find it useful and can embrace its message and share it widely.
Thank you for doing so much public good. I mean, these are things that are not the easiest subjects to approach. And so it's really wonderful to see people really caring people like yourself and Linda, really putting some effort behind it and making the time and really caring about, you know, helping people. So thank you.
Well, it's satisfying to think that in both cases, both projects involved feeling like we could make a difference and save some lives. We've heard that feedback from the public service announcements. If again we had 6,000 or maybe by now 7,000 airings out there, and we have to think that we have influenced some people. We can't prove it, but I have to think that out of that number of people that we reached, that some people at least considered getting vaccination, telling their family members to consider it. As I say, I'm underscoring the fact, I'm using the word consider, because for some people with health issues, it's not the right thing to do. But it's certainly the right thing to consider doing. And as I say, some people come pretty late in the process to wanting to be vaccinated. In other words, when they're in the emergency room, that's when they think about it. But of course, then it's too late. So we're simply trying to open the door for a wider discussion, let's call it, than perhaps has been out there, because you mentioned earlier, it has become polarized. And these are sensitive topics, they're difficult topics, and so we're trying to, on a low-key basis, kind of open the door for further discussion.
Thank you for doing it. It's not an easy thing to do, and hopefully it does save some lives. And I think, we see that it is a really hard time in the world right now for many, right? And so
Our time in the world.
whatever we can do, and
It's
whatever we
interesting.
can do.
No, it's whatever we can do is, I'm sure, appreciated. I've noticed recently, and we didn't do them, but there are some public service announcements out now offering, here in California at least, some mental health counseling for people that are just generally feeling the malaise of COVID, the uncertainty of it. Their kids may be homeschooled. Some people have lost their jobs. There's inflation on. There are a lot of related challenges to COVID. Businesses have closed, etc. And I think it's very dissettling for people. So if you can make yourself available, avail yourself of those kinds of services, I think it can be very helpful, because that is an important aspect to treat yourself with kindness in the middle of this. You may not have COVID, you may not have been infected directly, but just the general discomfort of not knowing if a business is going to be open, or not knowing if you're going to have to wear a mask, and if so, for how long, and when do you get the next vaccine. All of those uncertainty elements, I think, make us uncomfortable. And so getting some mental health support can be very valuable.
No, I can't agree more. I mean, I think to be kind to yourself and others, or another way that some people say is to be gentle with yourself and others. But being kind to yourself and others is going to be so big, because I think it's easy to forget, right? Sometimes you're at your job and you're stressed out and there's deadlines. And unfortunately, it's interesting when you're in the midst of it to step back and say, you know what, actually, the team, there's probably other people also having their own concerns, their own stressors. And you know what, that stress creeps up on us whether or not we're aware of it, right? We could sit here
Yes.
and say, we're managing it fine. I'm managing just fine. I think I'm okay. I can handle the uncertainty. I don't know, when next year is going to be next year again, in a normal way. And you just keep pushing it off. But in reality, it's also just physiological, right? Your body feels
Yes.
that uncertainty, whether or not you have managed it well emotionally. There's also a lot more going on than meets the eye, right?
It's true, and it's such a great theme to be kind to yourself and be kind to others because someone said we never know what others are going through. It's the I heard a story once about the guy on the guy on the freeway who cuts you off, and you're mad at him, and you think, "Geez, I'm gonna get back at him," and you get boiled up about it. But then there's the other side that maybe he just got some terrible news today. Maybe his wife is sick. Maybe he's racing home to take her to the hospital. Maybe he lost his job. We don't know what the other person is experiencing, but if we can stop and take as our first response, expand to take in the possibility that maybe the person's motivations aren't quite what we thought, I think it can be very enriching.
I agree. And I'm really, I mean, I truly believe that it's hard sometimes in the moment to stop and take a pause and say,
Mm.
okay, let's lean into empathy. Let's see if maybe, we could be the the more patient one here.
Yes.
I think those are the moments, right? Those are the moments when you're a little emotional or stressed yourself that
It's
you
harder
kind
to
of
do it then, right?
it's
Like,
calling you to meet that moment.
it is indeed, but there's a little trick you can play a little game with yourself. You can make up um, those stories, as I was saying, about what is this person going through. The guy that cut you off on the freeway that I was conjuring up. Uh, what could be his circumstance or her circumstance, so that it can make it a little bit of a game and as you say, take the edge off it, because at the moment it's not so easy, right? To,
Right.
if some little minor slight in your, as you say, you're in your own the midst of your own challenges, well, that can be the tipping point. But making it something that's a little more expansive and, as I say, kind of play, uh, can can take it to a little better place for that one moment, and it's so personally enriching. The benefit is to yourself in addition to the other person.
100%. I think the big call is in that moment, it's also to take a breath for yourself, right? To say, oh gosh, I'm kind of agitated. I've got the feels and I'm a little bit triggered. What can I do to kind of calm myself down and then try to be more rational and reasonable and think about, oh, what is that person going through and what might be the best thing to say or do in the situation? Not to aggravate things further, but to kind of take the edge off. Yeah.
I want to tell a funny story about you. May I do that?
Yes.
It's a sweet story, and it fits exactly with what you're saying. So, you and I were in Northern California about, what, 3 years ago, and we went into an establishment, and without getting too detailed, we ran into a clerk who was snippy, let's just say. And who knows why? It could be that she was tired and about to get off work, that she had to deal with crazy people all day. None of those did we know. But the thing that you said that I think, and the way you said it was what was so powerful. What you said was, "Could you be a little nicer?" And it wasn't said sarcastically, because if you do that, then it's just the opposite. But your genuineness came through, and I think it touched her. And it was just to kind of bring to awareness that she wasn't being the best person she could be in that service position that she held. Um, but as I say, your delivery was everything, and I'd never heard that quite that
Well,
clever of her before. So hooray, Tina!
thank you. But thank you. I mean, in the
You knew I was going to
moment,
bring that up. When did you know?
just when you mentioned it,
Oh, this
started
guy.
to start
Nice.
just as you started to mention it. I do
Hmm.
remember being really kind of a little bit concerned as to how to best approach the situation. So she was getting, I think she was just having a really bad day, honestly, and she was getting more and more upset. So I was just, I don't even know what came over me. I just was like, well, in hindsight, see, 2020, I would think it may have even been more helpful if I had said something along the lines of maybe we could all be nicer for
Mm.
a little bit.
Well,
Yeah,
I
maybe.
want to give you credit for reading the room, and
Thank you.
as I say, the sweetness of that with which you delivered the message was really key. I'm glad you did rather than me, because I don't know that I would have done it as gently, and so it really it was beautiful. And as I say, it stuck with me for a while here, and but I think it typifies what we're talking about is without letting it just fly past, recognizing what the reality is of that situation. And it wasn't that comfortable, but maybe the woman wasn't that aware of it. Again, she was caught up in whatever it was. So uh, I like that. Just such a sweet example. And as I say, I got a chance to make you blush a little bit.
Definitely. But thank you for that. I think it's interesting right now. It's like a very strange point in our lives, right? For everybody. And I think not knowing whether or not our lives can go back to being pre-pandemic days soon is stressful, whether or not we want to embrace it. And you know what? In any day, even pre-pandemic or no pandemic, it's it's hard to know what everybody's going through, and leaning into that extra
Mm.
compassion and understanding is going to be the most important thing for all of us to kind of try to embrace in the future.
Well, it's interesting because the thing that's occurred in just whatever the last decade, or depends how you want to count, but the rate of change of so many things in the world has increased. Um, we, we, we don't all know the same musical stars, um, although the Super Bowl recently tried to bring us all together on that. But we, we, we just see a lot of change in our family relationships, in how jobs are structured. Look at how many people are working on a gig kind of a job position rather than going to work for a company for a lot of years, same place. Um, Technology has changed how we interact, and that rate of change is really something that is a little dissettling, because if you have to learn a whole new um, regime for your job than you thought you did, it's gonna make you a little uncomfortable. So again, what you said is right. COVID or no COVID, um, it's a challenge. Life can be a challenge in general, but probably more so in recent years. So it's all the more reason to be patient with people, because again, their realities may well be different from yours.
I actually just saw a post. It was saying, you know, all these side hustles and these other jobs are, you know, they seem glamorous and they probably are a bit more. It's nicer just always to be a bit more of your own boss, but it also alludes a little bit to the stress that you know, it's not just the workforce is leaving because of COVID, but it's also maybe a ticking time bomb where maybe the way that we have been, you know, having companies be run or built or just you know progress for the sake of progress and going forward without thinking about you know what's the human experience of being on this team, you know what's the human
Mhm.
experience of um, going to work and having managers or like bottom lines that are almost unreasonably like demanding, you know, and then you've got also the technological advances and the internet. And I mean, as much as there's a lot of benefit to the internet and like keeping us connected, even despite a pandemic, there are also negative aspects around it where, you know, you're always on the phone, you know, the internet has made it so that you can be reachable from your job at any hour of the day. It's not actually that healthy, right?
When you're on vacation, when you're asleep, all those things. That's become the norm. You made another interesting comment a second ago. You mentioned people on your team. Well, that's something that if you're working gigs and changing your employer and you work here 3 months and there's 6, you don't really have as much of a team to develop those soft relationships with, to develop a kind of a team building flavor, because you're kind of one for all and all for yourself. And that's tougher, because one of the things that evolved over the last 150 years in our business world is we did have teams, and we were on one, and we worked at this company for a while. As I mentioned, that's much less common than it used to be. So having the disconnection from being on a team, or if teams change, if the company is merged, or if it's closed, then there's a certain insecurity in not having a team that you can treat as kind of a family.
That brings me to another thing that sort of is always top of mind lately is how can we kind of reapproach what makes a healthy team, right? And how to keep
Mm.
teams healthier. Because I think there's also a lot of, I mean, if everyone is stressed out, right, and the speed of innovation is going 80, 100 miles per hour, but you're only just one person, and then you're trying to all be great team members. I think it honestly, for me, part of the reason why we started the Gage is that sense of wellness, peace, or ability to be a good team player also comes from just taking care of oneself first, and then being, mind, body, soul, spirit, and then being able to be a part of a team in a way that you can make decisions and you can actually interact with people or innovate in a way from a place of abundance and like resourced energy and, rested, well, taken care of, and not in scarcity mode, not hurt physically or mentally. And that's when we can be our more sane selves, right? And make wiser decisions. And
True.
so it's a huge, huge moment, I think, for all of us to consider how to innovate in the future.
Well, it is, and as you say, it's made more challenging now in the last couple of years than it had been. So, all the more reason we have to put focus on it, and recognize the challenges of it. There are, as we have, you mentioned the internet a moment ago, and as we have more visibility around the world, and even within our own country, we see people that are not as fortunate as ourselves, and we are try to help, and we that enriches us if we can do it without becoming caught in the sense of defeat. And so it is it's worth finding your kind of yourself as a starting point. What do they say on the airplanes? You put your own mask on first, get your own oxygen flowing, and then it can be shared with others. But as we've agreed, I think this is a tough time to do all of that, and maybe not necessarily the first instinct. I know that your messages in this program are all positive and uplifting, and hopefully people will leave and carry with them some of that positivity into their next interaction, their next opportunity that could go either way. So
Yes.
they, with a little bit of a boost, and maybe the sense that this is what a lot of people are trying to do. Maybe they're not perfect at it, but their intentions are high, and so let's let's see the glasses half full when we're out there in the world.
Right. It's also just being very real and vulnerable. I mean, the reality is life is not getting easier for all of us. I think it's same to say it's getting busier for everybody. It's more demanding of everybody. Things are getting more expensive. You have to consider, what does this present and future, near and long term, look like, right? And so I'm really grateful for all of the work that you're doing, which is addressing some really real things. Like it's not rose colored glasses all the time. There are people
Mhm.
suffering and dealing with emotional duress and their own demons and issues in their lives. And I think remembering that we're human is going to be the big thing. Humanity does need to come first, right? And
Yes.
thinking about, oh, yes, everybody's upset about COVID, but what good can we actually do to kind of help people in this place?
Well, here's one data point I just saw in a headline um, today, and it was, for me, it was a positive one on the positive scoreboard, let's call it. And it was that Elon Musk, who's a really rich guy, of course, he had contributed something like what's the number? 6 billion. You can look it up, but it was a very large number. And he had previously not been a philanthropist of any scale. And he was giving it, I believe, to the United Nations to impact poverty and hunger in the third world. Now, don't don't mark off points if I didn't get all those facts quite right, but I do know that here's again, if we can see that in people who have an incredible amount of money, but previously hadn't been as sensitive to the world's issues. That's what strikes me is that here's somebody who's he didn't give away all his money. He's still going to do pretty well for himself, but he's attuned to some part of a message that perhaps at least we didn't think that Elon was so connected with. And I have to hope that this will continue to be impactful on other people of extreme wealth, that they can find that part of their humanity that we all value, and that can be sometimes swept aside in the accumulation of more and more wealth. So, as I say, we can look at that as a little bit of a success out there when we're wondering if anybody is getting that message that you're putting forth.
I hope so. I mean, well, yesterday I was watching an episode. I'm forgetting the name of the show. It's an FBI task force show. It's pretty new, I think. And I mean, to your point, there's also just even thinking about meaningful innovation from the point of view of what the consequences are if we kind of keep just going go 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 without thinking about what can we build along the way to kind of safeguard people. It was about it's kind of poignant actually with all the cyber attacks, not to go off on a tangent, but it was basically a hacker who was misunderstood. He was very like talented as a hacker, but nobody really saw that in him. And so to prove a point to his parents who kept on saying he's useless, he
Oh,
decided to start hacking into actually a electric vehicle, and then hacked the car and then made it crash into a tree and set it on fire. And then it was like, then he went on to attack a hospital system and like shut it down. Then went on to try to hijack a plane and bring that down. And it was kind of a little bit of a lot to watch, because you're just thinking about, well, if we don't address the cybersecurity issues and the impacts, and then it's interesting because it really hits home on this topic. It's, you know, the individual story and how people are feeling on the inside can also affect where they take that energy, right? Or that emotion. And so it goes back to, I mean, hopefully we can actually think about creating for everyone, but also think about a better way of meeting people where they are at home too,
mm,
right? Because most of it was stemmed on he wanted to prove a point just because
right.
he had all this stress or these feelings of not being enough. And so
And not being recognized, I suspect. It sounds like he was a very talented guy, but not not seen as such, and so he had to kind of prove it. Just think of all the people that suffer under that have a gift they want to share it, they may not know how to share it. They may have been ridiculed for it, but that's um, there are certainly many examples of that kind of genius that get sent into a, a dark place. So we can be thankful when those individuals get the kind of support that they need, because then that kind of thing doesn't happen, what you just described.
I mean, I have to say actually, to give you a little bit of credit, and Linda, you guys have been the ones reaching out to me, and I've actually have had some longer journey with this COVID thing, being somebody immune sensitive. And so I do want to say thank you for having been such good friends and checking in on me, right? And this brings everything all back to a full circle. I just want to say thank you for the supportiveness. And I think that's also a really big thing. What you guys are doing in the world is immense, and such wonderful public good and service. And
Well, look at the public good and
thank
service you're
you.
doing in this podcast.
Trying.
I think you're there. I'll give you a big virtual hug, and when I see you in person, a real one. But no, thank you for that acknowledgement, and thank you, as I say, you're doing just as much with putting out a very positive message as we've been talking about in the last uh, minutes here, and what a what a blessing if people can take a little bit of that away from with them and carry it in their heart through the day.
That's my hope.
My hope.
And my hope is to amplify the good that's out there. You and Linda are just amazing humans. I know that as a fact. We're friends for several years now, and
Mm.
I'm floored by the programs that you have been putting out there and the campaigns. I know it's a labor of love, and thank you because it hopefully does
Well,
save lives.
I'll throw out one more, just kind of a soundtrack for this place we're talking about getting that's generous, that's compassionate, etc. We did a series of meditation videos called Gratitude, and it's about gratitude, not surprisingly. And if you go to gratitudevideo.com, you can enjoy these short form um, video and music expressions that can help you to meditate and help you put you in a nice space, even if you don't have time to meditate. Um, so that's just a little soundtrack for, as I say, some of the things we've been talking about today, and I hope some people can visit that as well.
Please do. Actually, meditation practice has been so helpful in my life, and gratitude really waking up, and it's become actually a habit now. I just see the
Thank you. Okay.
gratefulness in everything. So it took a lot of work, right? I think it's one of those things where if you start building that gratitude muscle and you appreciate even the small things in life, all of a sudden you just sort of
Mm.
it becomes a way of life. Like you could something bad could happen to you and you could still be like, well, but the weather's not so bad, And I think a sense of gratitude actually is the key to just peace
Well,
and
you make an
happiness.
interesting comment. It's really the very small things that where gratitude is. It's a wonderful place to start. The fact that when uh, you flip a switch, a light can go on. When you go outside, it can be sunny. It doesn't cost you a nickel. And having that kind of an approach is, you call it a muscle. I think that's a great way to look at it because that's something that you can build and develop. And as I was saying, it starts with very small examples of it. It doesn't have to be something that's, I got a promotion at work. Well, that's great. But if it's something that's just as simple as I can walk outside and enjoy the weather and the trees, and they enjoy me too. Those those kinds of examples of gratitude, those are a great place to start. And it sounds like how long have you been practicing gratitude, Tina?
Oh, I was a strange kid. I think I've done it since
Since
you kind
forever.
of yeah, I thought it was me just being strange, but it turns out maybe it's helped me out more than I thought. But
Well,
I'm just kind of a crazy optimist and idealist, right? So,
mm, well,
but
but that's a great point. It does take stepping outside of what maybe we're conditioned to believe. If you look at the New York Times or turn on television or look at the internet, any news service is all about the shortcomings of humans and shortcomings of things in the world. And so, if we're talking about gratitude, it's shifting our perspective 180 degrees to, again, being a strange kid and finding the good that's out there. And no, I'm going to remember that because that's not kind of what we're taught. You know,
well, I think also I'm sure anyone who has kids can allude to it's not the easiest thing to raise a kid, and then you're kind of doing silly things, and your mom's like worried, like don't do that, and then you just kind of think about, oh hey, this raindrop is playing a very fun little game with other raindrops on the window. And I just remember
mm,
moments like that while kind of probably being a little bit, maybe a
well,
little bit in trouble. So,
well, you're right because there's so much to do in life just to get through it, and so you can't spend your time. looking at the raindrops all the time, but having even the muscle that you can exercise with some regularity in moving outside of the most basic survival uh, activities we have can be so enriching because again we can carry it back into the rest of our day, and
I
isn't that
think
a
Oh, yes. I think it's also when people are going through a hard time. Like I used to have a few hard moments. I started kind of just being like, okay, well, at least the sun is shining nicely and it's warm.
mm,
And you kind of, you know, whenever I'm in a hard time, I try to see the positive. And I think that is the muscle that this gratitude practice, right? Like I didn't really realize there was an actual word for what I was doing, trying to stay positive or see the bright side of things. And then now there's like a gratitude journal, and starting with that, actually, I've heard is greatly life changing for many people. You know, they say I've never actually given myself room to be grateful, or never
mm.
really was given a prompt to consider that in their life. And so, yeah, it's a big deal. With the meditation project that you guys shared with the world.
Well, it's just a step, and as I say, like your podcast, they're the theme, such a positive theme that you put forward. I can't help but to think that people are going to walk away enriched by it and carry it to their family, their loved ones, people they work with, and everyone else in the world, everyone they
I
see.
hope so. This is why we started the show. Is there's so much meaningful innovation and leadership, and more leaders stepping up into the light like you guys and sharing so many great projects. This is why it was kind of hard to give you an intro, because I was like, you guys are doing so many good things. And so I just thank you for even being on the show and sharing the projects, because I think making sure that people have access to them and know about them is going to be such a big benefit for so many lives.
Well, thank you, and I hope that people will carry forward that message. Thank you for having me on this little conversation, and I've loved where we've gone with it to encompass today's activities and today's events, and some of the work we've done, and hope that people can continue to stay positive.
Thank you. Thank you for caring and being such caring people who are doing so much good in the world. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And we'll try to have Frank back on the show sometime.
Thank you now. Bye.
Bye.